Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Welcome back to Outschool Live, where we feature experts from our community and beyond. Thank you, everyone who's supporting us and watching these streams and these programs. We really appreciate your questions, your comments, and your enthusiasm. We have so much going on in the community. We have personalized class recommendations, weekly power half hours on Instagram, parent and caregiver community programming, free learning community events, and of course, over 140,000 small group classes and one-on-one tutoring on our global platform. And yes, you can use charter and ESA funds. So if either of those pique your interest, please comment and ask our social team. We'll get to you with any answers for any questions you might have. So please let those questions flow. But enough about me. I'm going to bring on Tina, who is going to talk about women's history, and even we might even talk about some women warriors, because she just joined us in the learner community where we have free programming in the learner community. So we have learner community events, and please ask our social team about those events. If you're not familiar with Outschool and you're new to the Outschool community, please don't forget to sign up for Outschool and use our Go Live 10 for $10 off your first class. So without any further ado, I'm going to welcome Tina to the stage. Tina, perfect timing. How you feeling?
Good. Little technical issue there. Made it just back in time. So
Yeah, it was perfect timing. Perfect timing. Thanks so much for joining us, Tina. I introduced you as teaching women's history on Outschool, among other things. So, how about you tell us what you teach, and then a little bit about yourself.
I teach a little bit of everything, mostly history. I have a passion for the stories that make up history. So kind of the biographies, because it's those stories. It's like when you go to a movie, you want to know the personal stories behind the characters. So I look at the stories behind history, the people, women in history, all kinds of different moments in history. But I also teach a lot of U.S. history, going with all the presidents, the states, formation going back to the Revolutionary War. But I also teach quite a few classes on like study skills and organization and planning and things like that.
And you're saying that you also teach those in one-on-one sessions.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. So you have like group sessions on women's history, and
Oh, yeah.
then sort of more academic history, but then also some organizational
Yes.
skills. Do any of those overlap?
I guess sometimes, maybe. I don't know. I never
Yeah.
thought of it that way. I'm gonna have to look
Are,
at it from a different perspective.
are people who make history more organized?
Ooh, good question. I would tend to say no, but I don't know.
There's a chance.
There's a chance. I'm sure
that
there's some.
that I can make history here. Whew.
Yeah.
All right. Oh well, that's exciting. So how, the subject is, how to find classes on women's history, and you're the people in the Outschool team. We're very excited to have you, as you have a reputation for teaching excellent history courses, in particular women's history. So what do you let's see, how do you create your classes? What are you looking for when you create your classes that you think maybe parents should look for in classes?
I think that a lot of it goes into interest. I do have like a weekly ongoing class where every week we just look at women from around the world. It's just a broad, different woman. Like this week we explored women from Brazil, because a lot of times it's cultural difference. A lot of times it's a language barrier. Sometimes there's amazing women from around the world that you've never ever heard of before. So there are a lot of broader, just general women in history classes. There's also a lot of more specific. Are you looking at women in STEM? Are you looking for women in theater? Are you looking for women in music? So it just kind of, I think, depends on how broad or specific you want to kind of delve into those stories. What's personal to you?
Ooh, okay. Ooh, lots of questions. It's hard to focus on what question I want to ask next. Is like, oh, that's a lot. Okay, I'm gonna ask. I'm gonna, maybe hot topic. Why teach women's history, and why should parents look for that kind of course?
I think a lot of it is I find history fascinating. Like I said, I personally love all the little stories, all the little nuances, all those little things that explain everything, right? I mean, it's like the recipe for what we are today. Um, but it's those little stories that can find where you find those inspirations, where you find maybe, aha, I hadn't thought of that. Let me try that. In those things that kind of motivate us. And I think delving into those stories can sometimes, even if you have no idea, you have an interest or something, you find a passion or something that maybe resonates or connects. One of my favorite women in history is Bessie Coleman. Bessie Coleman was the first African American woman to get a pilot's license. I'm afraid of flying. I don't like heights. I don't even like going on bridges. So that's not the aspect that I find. For me, it's her work ethic. When she found this passion for flying, she wanted to go to a pilot school. Now, of course, being in the time period, she was told no because she was a woman, because she was African American. This was after World War I, and she had her brothers and her friends going, "Hey, well, why don't you go to France?" So she was already working as a manicurist. She got another full-time job working as a waitress at a chili shop and went to school for a year to learn French so she could fill out the application and go over there. That work ethic, that's what inspires me. That drive, that passion to achieve her goal, that's what I look for. So I think sometimes it's those stories that you don't even realize what you're going to get out of that end up inspiring you.
Oh, that's exciting. What year was that again that she did that?
Oh, it was in the
Do you know?
1930s.
Oh wow. Um, so you're saying like that it's that passion that that inspiration that you find of that particular subject.
Mhm.
Is that how you determine who you're gonna who you might feature in your class?
Yes and no. For me, sometimes it's the women that I find fascinating. My students I've had a lot of students that have been with me for 3 or 4 years. They could tell you who my favorite women in history are. But a lot of it too is I know that there are a lot of topics and interests that I'm not into computers. I'm not big into science, but I also recognize there are a lot of people who are. So what I tend to ask the annoying question, one of my icebreakers when I meet a total stranger, who's your favorite person in history? Who's your favorite woman in history? And I've learned so much about just general, because if you do a general Google search, you're going to come across the same names: Amelia Earhart, Jane Goodall, Clara Barton, and they're amazing women, but there are so many other stories. And so I just ask strangers.
Let's ask strangers now. Tina, you want to lead that question?
Sure, sure, sure. Oh, who is yours?
Oh, my favorite woman in history.
Mhm.
Um, all right, I'm gonna go with the first thing that came in mind, but um, and then I'll follow up. I'm thinking Susan B.
Okay.
And most what came in my head is I once heard this man sing this song about how much he wanted to be Susan B. Anthony. And I was like, okay, I got to find out more about why he wants to be Susan B. Um, but also, I think when you ask that, I can like feel my wheels turning. Of I don't have as many women in history in my head as I do men.
Absolutely. And sometimes it's not until we're posed that question that we're like, I don't know how to answer that. I don't have an answer for that. And that's when we start delving in and doing that deep dive, going, well, how many women did participate in the Revolutionary War? Who was the first woman to become a nurse? And it's not until we ask that question that we start delving into that.
Um, well, I want to ask that question to those who are watching. Thanks everyone for who's watching and signing in. And I want to ask, yeah, who's a woman in history that you think we should delve into? Feel free to explain why, and have those conversations on this thread. Love to hear what you think. Um, Tina, why do you think families should be interested in teaching specifically women's history
I
classes?
think I think there's a lot of stories out there, and by stories I mean those biographies, those incredible people that help, like I said earlier, that kind of help explain the whys, the hows. They help inspire. They help kind of fill in those puzzle pieces. I always equate history as being part detective and being part passionate about jigsaw puzzles. Your job as the historian is to find those missing pieces of the puzzle. And, maybe they flew out the window, maybe they went under the couch, but those are where a lot of those women in history are. So now we have to find them because they help us complete that puzzle.
Ooh, are there still a lot of pieces missing?
Oh, yes, most definitely. Oh, yeah. But that's
Are
part of
there?
the fun too, is finding those.
Oh, oh, so that and so you get to find those,
Oh, absolutely.
right?
That's part of
As
the
you're
fun of my job. I love what I do because I am constantly, I've never heard of this woman before. This woman is amazing. How have I never heard this story before? I love what I do for that reason because I'm constantly being inspired.
we were just having that conversation. I think is Julie Julie Alvarez as well, who's talking about like finding what we are passionate ourselves about, because our learners can really they can smell if we're not passionate about a particular subject.
I agree. Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that if you are teaching something, no, we're all going to have those topics that, as a teacher, that happens. But I think if you are passionate about a topic, it's going to come across and it's contagious. It's one of those things that really kind of resonates with students and kids pick up on that.
Totally. For those who are just tuning in, hi, welcome. Thanks for joining us here at Outschool Live. We're here with Tina. We're talking women's history on Outschool, where we have over 140,000 classes for learners from around the world. And if you're new to the community, feel free to use one of our coupons. Run it on the little ticker tape below. We'll let that run for a little bit. So, Tina, we're just talking about passions and teaching to your passions. What kind of learners do you feel? Do you have like a type of learner that you see usually comes to either to a women's history course?
No, and that's the fun part. It is that they're because I every once in a while ask what inspired you to take this class, and I love the blunt honesty. My mom made me. I love that. And sometimes those are the kids that are totally like oh, at the end of class, and you're like yes, it's one of those moments where you did a good job. But there's kids that come in that probably know more about the topic than I do. They're passionate about it, and they just want to talk about that person. And so it's one of the fun things about teaching women in history is there are so many topics because we generally scrape the surface, kind of like you said, your first woman that popped in your head was Susan B. Anthony. So if I was to ask you, name another woman who was involved in the women's suffrage movement in the US.
Oh man, putting me on the
Pop
spot.
quiz,
I'm
pop quiz.
horrible. I'm a part of the problem.
But that's okay. But no. Everybody is that way because we do tend to focus on the same stories over and over again. Like I said about that Google search, Amelia Earhart, Jane Goodall, incredible women. But there are so many other stories that were involved. My
Can
personal.
you? Oh, go
Oh, go
for
ahead.
it.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was gonna ask. Give me like the top three, or not the top three, but like a deep dive. Who are three women that I should look into in the suffrage movement?
Well, it depends on which country we're talking about. In the United States, I always suggest Alice Paul because Alice Paul took it from petitions and speeches to organizing the first march in Washington in front of the White House. Alice Paul was incredible. She is the one that really took it to the next level in the early 1900s and helped draft the ERA, which has not passed yet. But her inspiration was a woman from England named Emmeline Pankhurst. Emily Pankhurst's motto was deeds, not words. She literally waged war against the British government. Have you ever seen the Enola Holmes on Netflix?
I've seen the
This one?
trailer
Okay.
image.
There's a scene in there in Enola Holmes, not to give any spoilers for anybody who hasn't seen it yet, but there's a scene in there where her mother is very involved in the suffrage movement in England, and she breaks into this warehouse and it's filled with gunpowder and stuff to make bombs. That was the women in England. They waged war. They blew up things. They were incredible. And that was where Alice Paul got her passion and her inspiration. She went over after college to England and got arrested several times with Emmeline Pankhurst and the women in England. But then there's also Kate Shepherd in New Zealand. Kate Shepherd was one of the leading women in New Zealand, the first country to grant women the right to vote. I love her story because she went around gathering signatures, and she gathered something like 35,000 signatures for a petition saying this many people support the right to vote. She sat there and pasted them all end to end, wrapped them around a broom handle, walk into Parliament, and just let it roll. That image to me is just so inspirational, and I love that. So those would be the three women I would look at.
Oh man! All right, I've got them up on my tabs. So, all right, my homework assignment is to at least pop a link into the comments
Yes.
with these women. Uh, that's super exciting. All right, you brought up Netflix, and it made my head go somewhere.
Okay.
The Woman King. Have you seen it?
No, I have not.
All
I
right.
don't get a chance to watch much TV. I have a tendency to put on the same show over and over again. So I have not seen that yet. I want to, but I haven't seen it.
Okay. Yeah, I have no idea on the the historical context. So it's
I
like,
don't know how historically accurate it is, so I
yeah.
can't comment on that. So
All right. All right. Just curious. Just curious. Well, thank you everyone who's tuning in. Sorry, commercial time, Tina. Welcome to Outschool Live. We here at Outschool we have tons of classes for learners of all interests, of all shapes, all sizes, all passions, and we also have passionate educators who are really passionate about what they teach. And Tina, on that note, we're talking about passion and how that resonates. But I also, something that you said reminds me of a theme that I see in a lot of Outschool educators is the willingness to hear from our learners.
one of the things that I do in my women in history class, I have a class that's both men and women, that's amazing people. And then I also teach a music exploration class where we delve into music and things like that. In fact, probably starting in October, I dedicate at least one or two classes to letting the learners tell me who they want to learn. I let every learner involved within that month suggest at least one or two people that we're going to learn about the next year, because everybody has different passions, everybody has different interests, and maybe they have something that I've never heard of before. And I've learned a lot. I had one student that wanted to know in my amazing people class the history of soccer/football, depending on what country we're in. I know nothing about that sport. I am not athletically inclined at all. And it was fascinating. It was one of the most interesting classes I've ever written. And so I let my students tell me what they wanted to learn.
That's super exciting, and I feel like it's um like creative bravery, that
Oh yeah.
takes
Oh yeah.
to let learners take the
Oh,
lead, and I think a lot of I as a parent appreciate that when I see that in an educator. And I think it's just amazing to see how learners respond to that. So thanks for creating that space for learners to feel free to explore. Do you think I totally blanked on that question, um, but where do I want to go? I was thinking about like us as kids.
okay.
Do you think about your experience as a kid when you're teaching?
Oh yes, absolutely. I always loved history, but let's face it, we've all had those teachers that just you find yourself falling asleep and nodding off. And a lot of it when I started teaching was looking at why. What was the aspect of that moment in history? Was it memorization of dates? Was it I didn't learn enough? As so I feel about at Hamilton. I'm not a big fan of musicals. And two, it was there were I know. I just alienated half the audience. But but also it's definitely there's some poetic license in there. Things that aren't accurate. I loved it though because it made that moment in history that so many times when we're in school, we just kind of go over the important dates. We look at Washington, we look at Jefferson, we have the Declaration of Independence, we have the Revolutionary War, and then we just jump straight to the Civil War. And I love that it took one tiny little person to broaden this entire industry where people are passionate about that era in history. There are so many stories there, and I taught a whole class on Hamilton, and of course, at the end, my question is, who else in American history would you want a musical about? And it was fascinating to hear the answers. And I'm like, okay, I could do a class on that. And ooh, and it gave me ideas because there are so many moments and people who changed history who deserve their own musical, regardless of how we feel about musicals. So
I love it. All right. If you think someone deserves a musical, pop that in the comments. I'd be very curious of anyone who thinks anyone deserves a musical. And moms count, I think.
oh, absolutely.
What do you? Okay, so back to what parents should look for in online classes. I guess what do you think parents should look for in history classes or women's history classes?
I think starting with a broader approach, unless your learner has a very specific niche or very specific interest, but I think sometimes it's that broader approach. And I'm not the only one. There are so many amazing women in history teachers on Outschool. Start with that broader approach and just start delving into those stories, because you never know whose story is going to resonate. You never know whose story is going to make you go, oh, that is awesome. I love that. And one of my favorite quotes, Sally Ride, the first American woman in space, after she left NASA, she wrote a whole series of children's books, and she went around and toured children's elementary schools and things like that. And they asked her, and she said, well, that we've had women in before, we have women in space, we have women in NASA, we have all these things since the middle of the 80s. She said, but there's still so many aspects of it that if maybe if you don't see it, you don't think it's possible, or maybe it's something you've never even thought of before until you make that personal connection. And that's something that really kind of resonated with me. And I think sometimes starting with the broader approach, all right, who are the women in history? And then kind of narrowing that field down from there.
Do you, how do I want to ask this? Because how would you recommend, you said a broad approach. And I get in my head was, when approaching like women's history to children, do you think that it's helpful for parents to, I guess, sort of bring into the conversation of like, hey, a lot of these stories are lost because of sexism, essentially, or do you think it's better to present it at like, no, we're just bringing in women's history because it's a part of it, like not addressing it.
Why can't they be one and the
Makes
same?
sense? Ooh, tell me more.
But I mean, going along those lines, yes, there is sexism, but yes, there's discrimination, there's racism, there's so many aspects to so many stories. It's that intersectionality, why so many things have been left out, but it's all part of history and it's delving into, but that's the why it's been left out is a part of the story.
Oh, that makes sense. And now I got to go back in my head. It's like, why was I splitting those? Why was I splitting those into two? Oof, that's for me and my therapist. Oh my goodness. Well, we are creeping up to the end of our session. Tina, thank you so much for joining us here on Outschool Live. If you're new to Outschool, don't forget to reach out to our social team, and don't forget that when you sign up for Outschool, you can use GoLive10 for $10 off your first class. Tina, is there anything that I haven't asked about, or that parents haven't asked about, or anything you'd like to leave us with? Oh, and before that, I'm gonna put the link to your classes.
Oh, okay.
On the ticker tape below. But yeah, is there anything that you'd like to say that I haven't gotten a chance to say, or anything you'd like to leave us
I
with?
can't think of anything. Thank you for the opportunity. I in case you can't tell, I love talking about history. I get overly animated and excited, and it's just, to me, it's fun. And I love what I do. And so if anybody has any questions, please feel free. There are so many amazing history teachers on Outschool, or give me a message. I absolutely love talking about history. So
Absolutely, Tina. I think it absolutely resonates with with your energy that you bring here in talking about history and women's history. And I want to thank you for bringing that passion to learners and the community, and encourage families who might be watching to go ahead and ask your questions about history or women's history or any question you might have. And maybe we can get Tina to come in and answer some of those
oh,
on this
absolutely.
thread. Awesome.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much, Tina, for being here. With that, we're going to close it out. Thank you, everyone, for joining us here on Outschool Live, and we look forward to seeing you next week. Happy learning.